talk of the season, and a particularly warm welcome to Mary McIntyre, who's going to talk about lunar sketching and run us through. And I see that most of us in this room have brought paper and pencil and something round to draw around, be it the cat food bowl, or a bit of cooking equipment. May I introduce Mary? She's an amateur astronomer and astronomy communicator. She's based in Oxfordshire in the UK. She's a very keen astrophotographer, but also loves creating and teaching astronomy, sketching, and art. She's passionate about astronomy outreach and was awarded the 2021 Sir Patrick Moore Prize by the BAA for her outreach activities. She has a very busy talks schedule. She's a fellow of the Royal Astronomical Society and a regular contributor to Sky at Night magazine and the Yearbook of Astronomy. Away from astronomy, she plays bass guitar and sings with a local band, loves to bake, and is totally obsessed, with anybody who's seen her Facebook pages, with Halloween. Mary, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I'll make sure I don't open the zombie clown presentation. That's what I've been working on this week. Oh, thank you so much for inviting me to do this. I'm going to talk a little bit about sketching just very briefly, and then we're going to get together and do a hands-on sketch. So I'm going to share my screen, and then I'm going to stop, switch cameras, and then we'll draw together. So first of all, why sketch? In a world where you can pretty much get any telescope, point it at the moon, and then with an iPhone, take a photograph that knocks the socks off a lot of pictures taken with a digital SLR these days. And for me, it was becoming obsessed with photography that prompted my interest in sketching. And that happened about 8 years ago. 10 years ago, I got my first digital SLR, and my entire astronomy activity became about photography. And I realized I had not looked through an eyepiece in over a year. And that made me so sad, because it just stops you from learning. I was tricking myself into thinking I was learning about the objects I was photographing, and I wasn't. You might spend a long time processing it, but are you really studying the shape of the stars, or the shape of a nebula, or the way that the shadows have evolved on the lunar surface? And the answer certainly for me was no. I was taking a picture, shutting the observatory roof, coming in, post a picture on Facebook, never look at it again. So I started sketching, and I'm going to show you my first sketch, which is not great. And I know that a lot of you are going to be like, I can't draw a stick man. That's great. You don't need to draw a stick man. So I'm going to take you through in detail how to create a sketch in a minute. But first of all, a little bit of information about materials. Tonight, I am sketching with you. I do have a 2B and a 3B pencil, primarily because they show up better on camera, but you can do this with any writing pencil and printer paper, and that is what I'm using. I'm using printer paper tonight, so I've got the same stuff that you do. If you decide you like this and you do want to explore it a bit more, there are a few things that you can do to improve things. And first of all, you do not ever need 24 graphic pencils. This was a gift, and I use 3 of these. Like, whatever I'm doing at home in pencil, I never use more than 3 pencils. So a 2B and HB, that's all you need. So if you buy 2 pencils, get an HB and a 2B, that's literally all you'll ever need. For blending cotton buds, you can get about 1 million for £1. I get the ones that are paper so that I'm not contributing to plastic waste, but you can get so many for very little money. But you can also get these blending stumps, and they work really well for some things, but sometimes cotton buds are better. And I actually use these as a drawing implement as well as a blending implement, and I'll definitely be showing you that tonight, because you get the softest effect when you draw with the blending tool. It's lovely. In terms of paper, you don't need to go out and buy super expensive acid-free paper for this. Just any kind of drawing paper will be a little bit thicker. So that means if you go over a few times and do some blending, it's not going to get kind of very thin and crinkly like some paper can. And it will just be a bit smoother. And the surface is just a bit smoother and it helps with the blend. But that's pretty much all that you'll need in terms of pens and pencils. And pencil erasers, I have one here and I normally just trim the sides off it. If you want to get super bougie, you can get a putty rubber, and that's great because you can mold it to do very precise rubbing out. So you can kind of mold this into whatever shape you want to get into somewhere that you may have made a mistake. But you don't need a putty rubber. I only found this 2 weeks ago. I've had it for 20 years. So I've been using it this week for the first time in 20 years. So don't think you've got to go out and buy loads of stuff to do this. Honestly, just whatever pencil you have and printed paper will work. Now, this is when I decided I was going to start sketching properly, and it was in March 2014, and I was sketching Jupiter. I was just using my outreach telescope. It's just a very cheap 102mm refractor that I was given for free. Still my favorite visual telescope. I love it. It's very lightweight, easy to use. And I was just basically recording what I could see and kind of plotting where the Galilean moons were. I'm going to zoom in on this sketch because, first of all, Jupiter's not round. Terrible. The cloud belts overhang the edge of the planet. The diameter of Jupiter versus the distance of the moon, absolutely incorrect. But this sketch is still valuable because there are things you can learn from this. You can, first of all, know where the moons were. I had to look on Stellarium to label them, but it was in my notebook that I knew where those moons were. I also could tell a little bit about what the seeing conditions were doing, because this wasn't the Great Red Spot. This was another fragment of cloud belt. And when you're sketching at the eyepiece, it's important to sit with an object for a really good amount of time and just keep looking. And the longer you look, the more you'll see. And what obviously the two main cloud belts of Jupiter that show up very easily, but in between those little punches of better seeing, there were just these little hints of other things there. And that's what you can do and add to your sketch as you sit there and look. So yeah, this sketch is the most simple it can be. And the other thing we can learn from it is Mary cannot draw a circle, but it doesn't matter because it's still telling you quite a lot about what I was seeing that night. And it's fine to not have a perfect sketch. And even if you keep your moon sketches super simple in terms of just outlining a few shapes with a bit of shading, it's still valuable. It's still a really valuable piece of drawing. So please, if you haven't at home got your pencils and some paper, just go and grab some now, because I'd love you to join in. As we go along tonight, I don't want you to look down on your page and say, my sketch doesn't look like Mary's, it must be rubbish, because Mary's sketches don't look like Mary's sketches. I do these workshops, I use similar photographs over and over again. Genuinely, I've never drawn the same crater twice and it looked like it's by the same person. So it'll be depending what mood you're in, how much cramp you've got in your fingers. But the important thing, this is from Law and Astro Society. I did a sketching workshop with them on the 8th of July. And these people sent in their sketches, and you can see clearly that this is all the same crater, but no two of them sketches look the same, and that's fine. That's how it should be. We all have unique handwriting, we all have a unique drawing style, and it's important to maintain your drawing style when you do stuff like this. And just on pastels, I'm going to show you how to draw on black paper with pastels at the end in the form of time lapses. But again, with all of these sketches done at Solar Sphere, you can see which ones are the same crater. They're just very obviously Archimedes, and there's a couple of Arzachel in there, but no two are the same. And that is what it should be like. If you look at drawings by Caroline Herschel and compare them to what William Herschel drew, not the same. So don't look down at your sketch and just think this is rubbish. The other thing that's useful to do as well is to actually just step away from your sketch if you're hating it, prop it up on something and step away and look at it from a distance, or take a picture of it and look at it, because you'll suddenly see it with different eyes. And genuinely, nearly every sketch I've ever done has almost ended up in the bin, and I've now learned to just step away, go and have a cup of tea and come back, and then you realize it's actually one of your favorite sketches you've ever done. So don't be hard on yourself, be kind, and this is something that you will get better at with learning. So in terms of sketching the moon, it's really important, if you're doing this at the eyepiece, we are doing it from photographs tonight, obviously, but if you're doing it at the eyepiece and you have a particular crater in mind, be really mindful of what the lunar phase is and how far away that crater actually is from the shadow and light boundary, the lunar terminator. Because if it's a long way from that and it's fully illuminated, you're just not going to see the detail. So as an example, both of these pictures were taken with the Liverpool 2-meter telescope. It's of the Ptolemaios trio. When you've got a last quarter moon or a first quarter, you've got all of this gorgeous relief on the lunar surface and all of these lovely shadows and highlights, and that is one of the things I just love to draw. But over here, when the moon's nearly full, you can barely even see that crater trio. I know it's there because I know that part of the moon really well, having studied it for a long time. But if it really wasn't for Crater Herschel, it'd be hard to even get your bearings on that trio. So it's super important that you don't choose a picture of Ptolemaeus that looks like this and try to draw it, because there's nothing to draw. It's really boring. So just when you're looking for pictures to practice on, just look for stuff that's got really good shadows. And shadows on the moon are awesome. They're so crisp and sharp because it doesn't have an atmosphere, which is great. The other thing that can help, especially with photographs, but also at the eyepiece, is if you break up what you're seeing into abstract shapes. So I get complimented on this photograph quite a lot. People saying it's so good, it looks like a photograph. Trust me, if you overlay this on top of a photograph, they are nowhere near the same at all. But let me just zoom in on a couple of features here. None of these things are exactly fine art. There are some scribbles with some black triangles that aren't even fully colored in. There are just little squiggles here and there. What you're doing here is finding a texture with your pencil that mimics what you're seeing through the eyepiece or on a photograph. But when you put all of those together and look at the whole, you end up with this complete picture. So I find personally it's so much easier to break things down into just shapes, really, and that's the way that I find it best. So look for the bright white bits, look for the dark bits, and then just fill in all the little bits in between. And that's pretty much the way that we'll be doing it tonight. So we are going to be drawing Crater Plato. The photograph that we're using is by Dave Eagle, but this one here was a Damien Peach photograph. I think we have a massive disconnect with the moon when we look at it in terms of how big the craters actually are. And this crater is 109 kilometers across. So if we put one edge in London, it would be halfway to, well, more than halfway to Gloucester. So these craters are big, and they're the ones that we've got good pictures of because big telescopes can capture them in really good detail. So we are going to draw from this photograph. I'm just going to briefly stop my share and switch cameras so that you can see what I'm drawing. Now, when we get started here, I'm just going to share my screen again. People at home and also Nick, once I share my screen again, in the top right corner in the options, you want to choose the one that says small active speaker view or something like that. Yeah, small active speaker view, I think it says. And then once you've got just me and my screen share, you can put your mouse where the divider is and drag it across. So that will mean that this tiny window with my hands in will be the same size as the picture we're drawing from. And you may all find that that works a lot easier than trying to do it from the small window. If people are really struggling, I can just drag a photograph over and work from it, but we can see more detail on here and it's easier to point things out. So hopefully that will work okay. Now, as I said, whatever pencil you've got is fine. I'm using the 3B. The 3B pencil is darker and softer, so it blends more easily. Sometimes that's a hindrance rather than a help, but it's darker, so it shows up easier on camera. So blank canvas, terrifying. Where do you even start? First of all, most craters are not round. The thing we're going to draw around is when we do a full disk moon sketch after this one. So we're going to do 2 sketches tonight. Almost no crater on the moon that's of any notable size has got an actual circular shape around it. So the first thing I like to do is mark out the outline, and that means looking at the edge up here, because that's the kind of boundary on that side, and over here it's the boundary here. Obviously this wall is illuminated, but we want to do the outside edge and just pay attention to the shape that that crater is. Now the other thing to do is make this quite big, because the bigger you draw it, the easier it is to actually get the detail on there, because you're not fiddling around with a tiny sketch. I'm going to have to do it a bit smaller just because it's harder to get it all in the field of view of the camera otherwise, and you won't be able to see what I'm doing. So I'm going to start off just where this highlight bit starts, and I'm going to go round clockwise. So one of my eyes is kind of on what my pencil's doing, the other is sort of on the page. So that first bit is a more or less straight wall, and then it kind of comes out in that bow shape. There's some shadow in there, but we're going to put that in a second. So it sort of comes out, there's that little protrusion, and then there's a really nice rounded bit. Then it arches over and there's another rounded bit, and then that comes up and creates this little straight section here that's kind of going off at a slight angle. If you do this wrong, you can rub pencil out. So it's really not the end of the world if you think you've made a mistake, but you can correct most mistakes afterwards anyway. Now the crater wall gets a little bit kind of less defined here, but it does drop down a little. So we'll just leave a gap there for now, because we're going to draw shadows in there in a minute, but draw that little bit in. And then up on that top right corner here, we've got this little protruding wall that's catching the light as well. So these are the little bits of detail that will make all the difference when you're kind of looking at your sketch. The more of these features you've got around there that are kind of casting shadows and whatnot, that is what's going to make your sketch look very realistic. So that wall kind of kicks out down there. I won't put the bottom of those hills on yet, so I'm going to leave a little gap. Pick up here, there's another straight section, and it sort of comes around, and then you've got another little inlet, like a little bay almost, and then it comes around, and then at the very bottom it sort of flattens out again. So the crater is more kind of oval. Part of that is due to foreshortening because it is above the center of the moon. So this crater is slightly more round in shape than this photograph will suggest, because it's squished from top to bottom because of where it is on the lunar surface. So we've got a basic shape now, and all these little inlets and outlets give you a guide of where we're up to. So the thing I like to do next when drawing in pencil is to mark out the white bits, and that's because the page is white and we don't want to accidentally color that in. So I always take some time now to just look at where these really bright highlights are, and it's essentially just this wall really. There are a few bits right out here, but we'll deal with that in a minute. So I'm going to just draw like a thin parallel line from this bottom corner here. This goes up onto the inside of the crater wall. We've done the outline, so this comes up on the inside. Follow that in, and then when we get to where there's that funny shape, we bring that down and around, and there's this little bit up here as well that's kind of coming off in a really thin sort of angle. Over here, that whole area is white, so that comes in and around. That rounds off a little bit, but we are going to kind of put those finer details on afterwards. Just try to get the basic outline of where all those highlighted regions are. Then that sort of comes off at an angle there. There's a little bit more highlighted stuff here. And essentially with every crater, half of it's in highlight, half's in shadow. So as you'd expect, the highlight finishes about 180 degrees from where it started. So now we're going to leave those alone and come back to do those fine details in a minute. But that gives us that safety that we're not going to accidentally color those in. Now, while I'm kind of protecting some areas, I want to just draw this little rocky outcrop wall thing here, just so that I don't accidentally later on go and color that in, because it is, you can rub pencil out, but if you've colored in a whole section with a 3B pencil, it doesn't always rub out completely cleanly. So we've got those areas to leave white. So the next thing I like to do is look at the shadows on the inside of the crater, and these are so interesting to study. And when you take a picture, you think, oh yeah, there's nice crater shadows, but do you actually really think about what's going on? So the shadow here is picking up pretty much where that highlight left off, and it's really jagged. So we're going to just follow that line in from where that highlight finished there, and just, that's a really slim kind of strip there, and then it goes off at a slight angle and is a bit flatter, and then we've got a pointy bit, and these shadows are being cast by the crater wall. And if you look at a photograph of just that bit of the crater, you would think that the crater wall is all the same height, but it just literally can't be, because it's casting all of these funky shadows. So it goes right down, and then there's a few more kind of undulations, and then there's another sort of double hump here. And it's interesting with this crater because there's nothing along the crater wall that is really giving you any idea of what is casting these shadows. But it's an interesting thing to study, and you can actually measure these on a photograph and calculate how high the crater wall is from them using a really simple bit of trigonometry. So that's for another talk, but that is a really fun thing to do. And I hate maths, but I love doing that. So now we've got that marked off. Make sure that we also put the line along here so that we preserve our little bit here. So we don't want to color all of that in, our little white outcrop. And there is a little bit of shadow that is protruding around there. So now you just color all of that in. If you're using an HB pencil and you find that you're not getting like a particularly good like dark color, one thing you can do, I just switched to my HB. If you color in long strokes like this, going in one direction with an HB, don't push on too hard. If you then go over it in an opposite direction, you can see that that starts to get darker wherever it's overlapping. I'm not pressing on any harder here. Then you can go over in a third direction and it gets darker again. So if all you have is an HB, that may be what you want to do to get the shadows nice and dark. But this is a pencil sketch. It's not a photograph. So it's okay to look like it's pencil. So I'm just going to basically run around the outside here to just make sure that I don't go outside of the lines. And I'm just using long sweeping strokes, and we can blend over this to get rid of some of the pencil marks. But ultimately, this is a pencil sketch, and it's absolutely fine to see pencil scribbles on a pencil sketch. It's what tells people that you've put time and energy into creating this thing. You look at Galileo's sketches, you can see all the pencil scribbles. They don't have to be blended out so that they're completely invisible. You can if you want to, but actually I've really grown to love having my pencil strokes visible in my art, because it tells somebody that a human being has drawn this. It's not a CCD sensor or a CMOS sensor that's captured it. And that is really important. And these little pencil strokes, the way that you do them, the way you hold your pencil, they are the things that are going to make this uniquely your sketch, and your sketch will never look like anybody else's. So I'm doing this quite quickly, because if I sit down and concentrate, I can spend easily 3 hours on a sketch, and we want to do 2 tonight, and I'm sure you guys don't want to be here till 10. So I'm just going around these bits. So I've got my glasses on, so I'm seeing double in some places. That's why I'm hesitant there. Couldn't remember if that was a secret highlight that I'm protecting or whether I'm just need varifocals. So yeah, just coloring that in. So at the moment it doesn't look very three-dimensional, but the minute we get a little bit more shading on here, it will suddenly start to look very, very 3D on the page. So I'm coloring that little bit in there as well. So if you want to get your cotton bud now, you can just use little circular motions. Be careful not to smudge over the edge too much, because as I just said in the introduction, there's no atmosphere on the moon, and that means that lunar shadows are very dark and very crisp, and that is a feature that I like to kind of preserve within my drawings. And if you smudge over that too much near the edge, you can end up blurring that a little bit. You can clean it up with a rubber, but that just kind of blends it in a little bit, gets rid of, this is a really soft pencil, so that kind of gets rid of a lot of the pencil lines. But you can use that. I've got a bag of used cotton buds. I'm not even lying. I never throw my old cotton buds away because these are so good for drawing with. I use a clean one for each workshop because it looks nicer. So we've got those shadows on. Now, any time that a crater has shadows here, the chances are it's casting shadows out here as well. So what I want to do now, this is quite a complex bit of terrain, so I'm going to simplify it just for the purposes of time tonight. The one thing I want to mark out is this kind of crater wall that's catching the light. So there's another crater off to the left here. The middle of it is still in shadow. So I want to just do the vague outline of this shadow over here. So it's sort of comes around. We've actually got a little shadow on these humps as well, on our little hills that we've marked off. So starting there, just look anywhere that's got the really deep shadows. And these are the things that make each crater unique. So just having those basic shapes there are what will make people look at your drawing and go, oh yeah, that's Plato, or that's Archimedes, or that's Arzacle. And it's genuinely astounding. Once you've drawn a crater a couple of times, you will recognize it under any lighting angle in a photograph. They just leap out at you. You just feel like you've visited it and become acquainted with it in some way. And I love that connection. I really love that about sketching. It honestly just makes me feel so connected to the object. I'm not going to break into song, don't panic. So round here, this is quite a funky shape because there's a lot of complex sort of stuff going on, but I'm going to follow the vague outline of that. We're not going to fit all of that on because it will go off the field of view of the screen here. But when you've got time to look at these properly, just try to get all of those shadows in the right place. So that's coming round there. You've got some other highlighted bits over here, which we probably won't get time to draw. And that kind of goes off over there somewhere. But from the bottom here, the shadow does some really interesting things. First of all, we've got a shadow in the middle of this kind of, it's like a little harbor almost. And it's amazing how many craters actually have that. So this harbor sort of comes around on the inside here. So color that in, because if I don't color these in as I go along, I get confused and color the wrong bit. So do whatever's going to work for you, how you find it easiest. The shadow down here picks up pretty much from where the crater inside shadow is, kind of comes out. There's a little V-shaped protrusion there. And then it sort of sweeps right off over that way. So within here, we've got these little hummocky bits that start around about there, I think. Yeah, about here. So they'll come up like that. These will go in and fill in later because they've got a certain texture that you want to try to capture. And then there's this sunken crater wall here, which is just two kind of little sausages. Essentially, they're sort of connected but not quite. So think about where that is in relation to this landscape here. Just put that little crater wall in, just so that we've got that little bit not colored in when we do this scribbling session now. So that kind of hooks off at an angle there. So we just want to leave this little bit here not colored in. It looks bizarre when you just draw it in like that. But now all the bits that we haven't sort of marked off to color in there, just color all of that in. So I'm just going to use long strokes there, making sure that I don't encroach on that bit there that we've preserved, because that's the highlighted crater wall on the inner edge. You move your hand around as well. Don't worry about kind of how you hold your pencil and where your hand is. Just I'm trying to do it so I'm not blocking the view as I draw this. So you can take your time more with this when you do it yourself at home, but I'm just trying to quickly scribble this in. And doing these big areas like this is definitely a little easier if you've got a softer pencil than an HB. But I've done plenty of sketches just with an HB pencil, and I love the results. So it doesn't matter if your shadows are not like super, super dark, you still get the effect that you're looking for. And remember the cross-hatching thing. If you're finding that you're not satisfied with the depth of your shadows, just go over it in a different direction and it will start to darken up. You'll get more pencil strokes that way, but as I said, I actually love that. I think it's really nice to see. I used to kind of spend half my life trying to eradicate any sign that there was a pencil stroke there, and realized that that's just not what sketching's about. So yeah, this is a big area to color in. So, and again, you can actually learn so much about a creator by looking at these shadows, and that you can tell stuff about the bit beyond the creator, because certain bits here are catching the sunlight, so you know that those features are higher. Anything that is bright white is higher in catching the sunlight more. Anything that's really shadowy is getting less light. And all we're doing here is playing around with light and shade to create a three-dimensional object. And it is incredible just how three-dimensional things can look when you draw them like this, even just in pencil, but particularly so in pastels on black paper. They really leap out there. But I think lockdown was great for me, because I've been doing sketching workshops in person and bringing black paper and pastels for years now. And I just stopped sketching in pencil. And because of the pandemic, having to do sketching on Zoom, everyone has pencil and printer paper at home. So I've adapted the workshop to work with what people are going to have. And it made me fall in love with pencil sketching again. It made me learn how to do it more quickly and stop agonizing over every boulder that you see in the photograph. This is an important thing as well to keep in mind. When you're drawing from a photograph, you are generally looking at a pretty high-res picture. And when you do this at an eyepiece, you just do not see that level of detail in an eyepiece. You really don't. So it's actually harder in many ways to do it from a photograph, because you've just got that much more detail here. At an eyepiece, you are never going to see the level of detail that you get with a high-res photo. So don't agonize over every boulder and little tiny outcrop being in exactly the right place. As long as the basic shape is there, that is the important thing, and that is what is unique to that creator and will make it recognizable straight away. So I'm going to stop the shading at that point, because it's kind of going off the field of view almost. And I am just anywhere that's looking like I rushed over it, just go over it in another direction, just get rid of the page that's showing through, and then grab your trusty cotton bud. And I actually find cotton buds are better for blending than the blending stumps in a lot of occasions. Sometimes the blending stumps are good because you can get a bit more precision, but I actually think you get a softer blend with cotton buds, and they are a fraction of the price. And once they get scuzzed up a little bit and get very fluffy, they give you an even softer implement for doing sketching with, which is just so wonderful. So blended over that. You can go over that with blending a little bit more after the session, but I'm mindful of time. I don't want us to run out of time. So going back to my 3B pencil, now we can see that we've got that little outcrop. We've got this bit here. So next we need to start looking at the shades in between. So the first thing I want to do to just try to kind of get the level, and we've got the really white bit and we've got the really dark bit. So have a look at the picture as a whole. We want to do the crater floor here. There's not quite the resolution here to see the craterlets, so it's fairly smooth. The color is not completely uniform, but we can deal with that in a minute. What you want to look at here is this shade of gray lighter or darker than the surrounding area? And for me, looking at this area here is quite light because it's all fairly high up. It's got lots of hummocky features. So what you need to do is just color in the crater floor and make it somewhere between the two. easier to go over it a second time and make it a bit darker than it is to rub it out. So I'm going to use my HB pencil and just use long soft strokes with almost the side of the pencil and fill in the whole of that crater floor. And I'm being careful not to encroach on the white bits, but I'm keeping in the back of my mind how dark this needs to be in order to be the right tone of grey compared to the rest of the bit that we're going to fill in a minute. You can always go over this and darken it, and I very often do that. I always err on the side of caution here because it is so much easier to just darken it a little bit than it is to try to lighten it. So do the crater floor first, and then look at the bits that are around the outside. So with this HB pencil, I'm just kind of going over it a couple of times because I can already see it's not quite dark enough. I may go over this again afterwards when we fiddle to just kind of get things right at the end. So that's given it a really fine coat that you can't really see very well on camera. So I'm just blending over that again to just smooth it out a little bit, even it out. And I probably will come back into that and make it a bit darker afterwards, but it helps to kind of have that contrast between this bit here and the bit in here. And while we're getting that bit right, let's just deal with this little outcrop here. It's very dark, but it's not as dark as this bit. So I'm going to go in with my 3B pencil here, and I'm going to kind of add texture. There's lots and lots of little kind of hills here. And what you're doing here is using your pencil to try to mimic that texture. I think I've actually need to bring this in a bit more, the darker shadow there. So just kind of go over this with squiggles. That it's basically finding ways of using your pencil to mimic what you're seeing, but without agonizing over every tiny white dot being in the right place when you're doing these hummocky regions. You can do that if you want to, but it's no longer a sketch because you can't do it very quickly for a start. So you want to leave some page showing through, but primarily here, all I've done is just made lots of squiggles and done enough of them so that that looks like it's darker than the highlighted bits that we've got on the inner edge. So that kind of helps again when you're trying to fill in this bit around the outside. So down here, loads of hummocky things, and you can see that these bits here are higher ground than the floor of the crater. You can just tell by the brightness of this bit. So what I like to do is to kind of, it doesn't have a firm outline really, no crater does with these sort of regions, but I like to just mark out a rough shape of where those hummocky features come out to and just follow that around. There are some little peaks and shadows here which are kind of fun to draw around there, but this comes out on a little outcrop, goes in again, and there's loads and loads of interesting texture that you can play with if you've got time to study all that area around it. And this comes up a bit closer up here. We've got a lovely kind of shadowy ledge that has sort of come out along there, and I'm going to just stick that little sausage in now while I see it. It's like a little caterpillar. Sometimes it really helps to just see things in like caterpillars or triangles or pyramids or whatever is going to help you to see the shapes. So color that in while I've noticed it because I'll forget, and then keep going around and bring that around. So all of the stuff that is within that little boundary is textured and hummocky, but it's nowhere near as dark as this bit over here. So the first thing I'm going to do is look for anywhere that's very bright. So on that edge here, the sun is coming from the left side. So the really tall bit of the crater wall there has got a little bit that's lighter. So where this kind of caterpillar comes out, it's sort of, you can see that there's a really faint grey line, like a boundary here that separates that like brightly lit section from these bits. And we've got this shadowy ledge here as well where the ground has sunk. So just look for those and just put those in. I'm going to blend these in a minute, because these features are the sorts of features that do really well when you go over it with a cotton bud, because these are not harsh shadows like you've got in the other part of the moon. These are much more subtle shadows. And this is a good way of doing things like slump terraces. If you've got a complex crater with slump terraces, get your cotton bud and get a scrap piece of paper, or just rub it over wherever you've just been colouring in. Just scribble some pencil down, rub over it, pick it up. So you've now got lots of pencil on here, then draw with it. Just have a look at where you're seeing those little shadowy regions, the bits that are just giving you that impression that there's a bit of the crater wall that's a bit higher and catching the light. And anywhere that you see those little shadows, just do it with the cotton bud, and it will definitely give you a way smoother kind of effect than if you draw it and then blend it. So I absolutely love using a cotton bud this way. And you can use a blending stick, and they have a more pointed tip, so it will help you with more precise versions of this. But anywhere down here now, you can see these shadowy bits are encroaching all down here, so we can kind of draw a few of those in. And you can see that you can build up those layers of slumps and other little bits of slump terrace that there may be all around that bottom area. Just get those laid down with the cotton bud. Same up top in this little section here. There's loads of little sections there that are shadowy with a little bit of the wall that's a bit paler. So again, just go in with your pencil and tickle it. Don't press on hard. Anywhere that you've got these little nuggets of shadow, just put those in. And as long as they're roughly in the right place, that is absolutely fine. You can get super accurate with sort of sketching and have grids and clock faces and all of that stuff, and that's something that you can certainly build up to. When you're first starting, just enjoy the process. Don't get bogged down on the details of like, oh, is it exactly right if I put it over a grid, or is the tilt right, is every shadow right? Don't worry about that when you first start, honestly, because it takes the fun out of it for me. So now we've got that bit, we do need to add a bit of texture here, but not a lot. So I'm not going to put in all of these little highlights and shadows that are going on in this region, because there's just too many of them and we're short on time. But what I want to do is texture this area that we've just marked out needs to be textured, but not a lot, because that area is lighter than the crater floor. It's also lighter than the area around the outside of the crater. So this is where squiggles come in again. Just see what sort of texture. Does the texture look like it's running horizontally, or is it running vertically, or are there kind of slopes in it? And just do your squiggles in a direction that is just sort of mimicking that texture. But remember, this is quite high ground, so we don't want to go mad here and make it too dark, because it will take away some of the three-dimensional focus when you kind of go too mad. So I'm leaving this bit here that's it's light, but it's not as light as that bit. But by the time we've finished blending, it's going to get a bit of overspill and will actually tone down a little. You can always just rub over with your finger as well. But just doing these sorts of dotted textures in different directions will give you that illusion of that rough, hummocky area. But because we're going to now make this outside bit darker, it will make it look right. It will give it the right sort of texture. So sometimes squinting at the photograph can really help. If you're trying to do it from a photograph at home, sometimes just blur it a little bit, like digitally blur the photograph, and it can actually help you to see those trends a bit more easily than when you're looking at it super high res. So I'm just tickling that bit there with the cotton bud, not too much, because we want to leave that quite light. So over here, we've got more of that, but that is much more, it's darker, way darker than this bit here. So again, just textures, hummocky textures, dots and dashes, squiggles. Here you can see that the squiggles are primarily going off at a kind of long angle. They are darker, so I'm putting more of them in. And that, again, will just all add to the three-dimensional nature of this whole sketch. The next step, I'm going to go around the outside of this. So it's just a way that I like to finish things off. You don't have to kind of carry this on. You can just finish it there and leave that bit as it is. But this bit is quite dark, so I'm going over again, just adding, pressing a bit harder, different sizes of shapes and squiggles, vaguely following the texture that we can see in the picture. So we've now got several different tones going on, and we now need to fill in the bit around the outside of this highlighted region here. Otherwise that isn't going to look like high ground. It'll just look like a splat, because right now it doesn't have anything to kind of put up against. So the way that I do that is, again, with my pencil on the side, not pressing too hard. I'm actually going to go for my 2B because you don't want this to be too dark. Remember, the bit we're looking at here is lighter than the crater floor, so but it's darker than this bit. So it's all about shades of grey, and I'm not worrying about all those other features that are butting up to this. You can add those if you want to when you've got more time, but I'm making sure that this is smooth because we want the texture that's butting up to that area to be smooth and dark, and that will make this other bit look rough and higher lying ground essentially. So just kind of side of the pencil, barely pressing on, because I'm using the 2B, and I'm actually going to follow it all the way around the outside because I just like to finish my sketches that way. If you don't like that, you don't have to. So I'll just bring that up to there, over here. So this area, remember, we don't want it too dark, but we do need it to be overall darker than the textured bit that we just did. So bringing that all the way around. And the second you get some darker, smooth stuff up around the edge here, it suddenly starts to make that bit look like it is high-lying ground. And that is all we're trying to do here. We're trying to mimic the light and shade. This bit down here is a little bit darker than the bit to the right, and that's to be expected. The lunar terminator is nearby, so there are going to be brightness differences here compared to this right-hand side. So follow that round, and then tonally, looking at this now, you can see that the crater floor needs to be a bit darker, and I knew that would probably be the case, but I wanted to err on the side of caution, so I always keep the crater floor light and then go over it if I need to. So I'm just quickly blending that because we're wanting this to look smooth. So I'm blending over some of that. The pencil strokes you've used are smoother, so you don't have to worry too much. But once you've got that, go back over the crater floor, and I'm going to go this direction. At this resolution, there are no craterlets, but sometimes there are some tiny craters that you can see on a crater floor. They're not difficult to put in. All they are a tiny white donut with a black dot in the middle. And once you put 2 or 3 of them in, it just suddenly looks like little craterlets. It's amazing, but we can't see those on this picture, so we're not going to worry about them. So I'm going over this now and trying to make it darker. But one thing that you will notice if you look carefully at any section of the lunar landscape is none of it is uniform. So blend over it again. And then if you need to, you can go into certain areas and then just add more shadow to them with your cotton bud if you need to. So like looking at this, you can see there are some little bands around here that are just that little bit darker. Some of it might be artifacts of processing, but you can rub your cotton bud into some of your shading and just look at that picture and just go in again and just change some of those areas to be a little bit darker, just with the smudgy end of your cotton bud. Just rub over anywhere or a scrap piece of paper, and then you can take your time and do those really subtle differences on the crater floor. So the only thing really left to do now is to look at this left-hand edge I'm going to use my HB pencil. This bit on the left here is not white all the way around. So we want to go in here and just add those features. So I'll bring you back down here. We've obviously got these dark bits here and this light bit, but there's a tiny bit of a shadow that sort of comes up there. Along here, there are a couple of little shadowy bits. Again, just alluding to the idea of texture there. There's a little bit of shadowy incrop here. And again, it's just an area where there's like a slumped terrace that's just got a bit of a shadow on it. You don't want to go too mad because we've been really careful to not color all of this in. But by just looking at where you can see any sort of gray bits or slumped terraces, just go in a little bit with your pencil and just smudge those in. And that's pretty much it. So if you did want to do a craterlet, you can use a putty rubber and just very gently, I'm going to put one in because I know where there is one just to show you. You can just use a putty rubber to just rub out one tiny circle, just do a little outline on it. Black shadow on one edge, which is going to be on the same edge that the shadows are falling. So all that tiny dot is that I've drawn there is kind of a white bit that I've rubbed out with one tiny little gray edge on it. Then if you wanted to, you could just run around the other edge to just give you that definition. So that's a dot and then a little sickle. That's it. But when you do multiple ones of those all on the same sketch, it all just kind of adds to where the highlight is. The highlight will always be on the left here because that's where the sun's shining. And then you'll have that little bit in the middle that's shadowy. So yeah, you can spend time now if you wanted to adding all of these little bits around here that have shadows, bits down here. And the more of this that you add, the more authentic this is going to look in terms of kind of being photographically realistic. But you don't need to add that level of detail. Just doing this is enough to get the general shape of a crater and the general idea. There's loads of stuff coming up out of these shadows here that, you know, we just don't have time to sit and do all of those tonight. So that's doing a crater. And I actually find quite often doing a crater in isolation can be a little bit easier than doing a whole disk moon. But that's because I hadn't done a whole disk moon very often. If you guys want to carry on doing these at home, the great thing about a full moon is that you don't need a telescope to see it. You can actually do a whole disk just with the naked eye. So if you take a little bit more time, these are just some other pencil sketches that I've done. These don't even look like they've been done by the same person. It really depends what mood I'm in, how much tension you have in your hands and arms. They all look completely different every time I do a pencil sketch. So I think it's really interesting that even your own sketches can be different sometimes. So moving on, this is not quite a full moon. It's a waning gibbous moon, but it's a really good one to use. So if you have something round to draw around, that's great. Again, go big. If you have an A4 page, find something round that is pretty much as big as you can get on the page, because it is honestly just that bit easier to do. So I'm going to draw around this bowl. Go back to my darker pencil, then you can see what I'm doing. Essentially, planning out a sketch like this is exactly the same. You've got your boundary there, and now you want to look at where all the light and shade is. And it's actually really good to use a cotton bud for a lot of this, but for the most part, I'm going to just mark out the Lunar just with my pencil quite faintly. Then the colouring in part, I'm going to mostly just use the cotton bud for, because there are no harsh edges to the Lunar. So I'm not going to press on super hard if I was doing this at home just for me. I'm going to press on a bit harder for you guys to see what I'm doing at home. So mine's going to look a little unnatural when we're finished. But just have a look at where all the dark Maria are. And this is a technique where I use the rubber to get the white bits, because it's impossible to keep these tiny little specks visible. So just try to get the shape of the lunar maria correct. If you're doing this naked eye, again, you're not going to see this sort of detail. There's this is a stack of quite a few images, so it's got good definition and you can see a lot of the fine detail, but it's hard to see the craters. Like I said before, when it's fully illuminated like this, it's really difficult to actually see the craters. So that bit sort of comes in like that and around. So the shapes are really interesting when you actually study them. And again, this is something I'd never actually sat down and studied properly until I started sketching. So little round crater there, and then it comes around and leaves most of that bottom corner very white. So just try to get the outline. You can change this. If you make a mess of this step, don't worry. You can rub that out and just blend over it and it will be fine. As long as you haven't pressed on too hard at this stage, you can correct all of this. So that sort of, there's lots of areas that are not quite bright and not quite dark with the Maria areas. So you've got these kind of highlighted regions and seas within seas almost. So it can get really mind-blowing when you're trying to get it all on. So I'm going to stop that bit there and pick up in this top corner. You can see that there is just a slight hint of white on the limb there. That's probably an artifact of sharpening rather than real, but depending on the lunar libration will determine what you're seeing on these edges. So it'll be different for every single time you look at the moon. And that's what I love about the moon, is that even if you're looking at it at the same phase, the libration will be different. So the moon is never truly the same twice anytime that I observe it. And I just think that's lovely. When you're looking at it properly, at least, it's never the same twice. So that comes down there, and then we've got sinus iridum here, and then bring that around. And then Plato, this bit up here, this is the crater we just drew is here. It's Plato, that little tiny round thing. So it shows you how good that picture was that Dave Eagle took when you see it in terms of the full disc. So that kind of comes around. So you can see where I've overshot there. That's fine. Just rub that out and blend it in again afterwards. So that is where those mountains kind of come round, the highland regions. So that's there. So obviously there are some tonal differences within that, but I just want to finish getting these shapes in. So redo that little bit there. I was always useless at geography, so trying to draw anything that's remotely like a map, I always get it horribly wrong. So just coming around, doing this Maria up here. It's got a lovely pointed bit on. I've honestly drawn so many sketches of the full moon now. I should be able to do this from memory, but I can't. And I say the exact way it looks on this photograph will be different from other times I've drawn it anyway. So here we've got another little kind of outcrop. Take notice of anywhere that's got like the outline of a crater, because you can see precious few of them at this phase. So let's follow that around. So these edges are just not harsh edges. So they're actually really difficult to capture well with pencil, but it's a sketch at the end of the day. We're not trying to produce a photograph, as I said. So Mare Crisium's right on the edge there. So I was doing a sketch today where Crisium was right over here. So the libration makes that look so different. Plus it's not a fully illuminated moon either. So down here, we've got this last little bit of Maria to go. And then there's one little crater there that you can see as well. So now that we've done that, I'm actually going to get my scrap paper and I'm going to just scribble a load of pencil down onto the paper, and I'm going to go over with the cotton bud and I'm going to smudge over all of those Maria regions with my cotton bud, because that is just the way that I find the best to just get a base layer down. You can go in afterwards and kind of do more sharp features, but I'm just doing this because a lot of these are really, they're quite subtle. They're not like harsh, dark regions compared to the background. And like the way that I've drawn it, the edges are way harsher than they are in real life. So you can go through and try to soften those afterwards. But I just like to do this coloring with the cotton bud because I think it just gives you the softer, smoother effect. And don't worry if it's not all even either, because you can take a look at that picture and see there are no two bits of that surface that are actually even. So once I've got the base layer down, you can then go over areas that are definitely darker and areas that are definitely lighter and use the rubber to kind of deal with other stuff. But for the most part of this shading in, I'm just kind of rubbing on that pencil and just getting the first layer down so that we've got that obvious definition of where the lunar seas are, because it's a complex landscape when you're doing the whole disc like this. And when you've got lines and nothing colored in, I always end up, my brain hurts over what bit I'm supposed to be shading. So I like to go over all of this first and then just make sure that I've got a nice kind of layer of not dark, but just darker regions that are quite nice and soft. So once you've picked up a lot of the pencil that's blended, just scribble on the page a bit more, pick up a bit more pencil. It's why I keep my old cotton buds, because the fluffier they are, the softer the blend that you get. So my husband despairs. I hoard everything because I'm a crafter and I make stuff out of rubbish all the time. And I now never throw away my cotton buds because there's so much use out of them to actually color with them. And if I'm doing stuff in pastels, I blend with them, and if I'm doing colored stuff, I'll blend with them. So I have a whole set of colored used cotton buds, which are so useful for drawing like this. I just love it. I really love drawing with them. So you can see that you're getting a lovely smudgy effect here, and to the naked eye there is really little more detail than what we've got on this page right now that you'd be able to see. Through a telescope, obviously you're going to have a bit more that becomes available to you. So again, I'm not worried about going over the edges here because it will help blend those pencil marks, and you don't want them to be too harsh if you're doing this like not on camera. I think it looks nice with a harsh edge though. I actually like it like this. Kind of looks like a drawing of a world map almost. So although it's technically not what the moon looks like, I don't hate it. So that's those basic bits colored in. So I'm going to glance at it again now and have a look at where is definitely darker than what we've got so far. So if you look at this area here around Copernicus, that's definitely not very dark, and all of those channels out from there is not very dark. And also the crater here, and you've got Aristarchus and Herodotus over there. All of these areas are nice and kind of pale grey essentially, but the bits around them are a bit darker. So I'm going to just try to go over and just darken them a little bit so that we've got the definition differences between there and those big craters. So it's primarily that bit on the lower left that I want to darken, just around here. And it is mottled, the surface is mottled, so don't worry if your blend is patchy, because that actually makes it look more realistic. So with my HB pencil now, I just want to try to get those craters on this left side here. So we've got Copernicus here, so I'm just going to do that rough outline. It's obviously not a circular crater, it's quite a big crater. Just do a rough outline of it. Get the corner of your rubber and just take away a little bit of the pencil that is inside it. And then what I'm going to do next is sort of mark out around this the area that is lighter. So the crater itself is the lightest, and then the bit around it is a lighter shade of grey, and it's got this sort of web-like feature around it. So I'm sort of putting that in. And one thing you can do with your pencil here is kind of put these rays in. Although the rays themselves are actually light, just adding a single pencil stroke in and then going alongside it with a rubber will kind of just, again, just that texture. You want people to see that there are ejector rays coming out of here. But if you do them all just in with the rubber, they don't have any definition. So I like to kind of go along with my rubber and just kind of just do a quick line out from there, just make it uneven. Don't get every single wiggly ejector ray exactly in the right place. You can if you want to, you don't need to. So you can kind of come in here and just add texture. We know that there's this sort of web-like structure, like a big paint splat almost. Important thing is to just make sure that the inside is the lightest, and then there's a bit of pale grey here, and then all the rest of it is kind of ejector rays coming out. So I'm just putting a few little squiggles there. There are no squiggles there really, but it helps to just get that illusion across that you've got that patch there. If you look very carefully, you can just get a hint of a central peak. So just put a tiny dot there from the shadow that the central peak has. There's not much of a shadow at all really, so you can do that if you want to, you don't have to. Then over here down the lower left, we've got this other little crater. So again, you can put a little boundary around it. I'm going to just use my putty rubber, make a little point, and just try to dab the pencil off out of that area there. Around the edge again. And then the bit that is really light here kind of comes out in this sort of shape. It comes around and then another sort of splat, but most of the splats are on this lower left side there. So I'm going to again use my rubber to just lift off a bit of pencil around the outside. Make sure you've got the boundary marked in pencil, and then just do your kind of ejector squiggles in pencil. You can add a few little stripes with the rubber as well, and that will pick up the pencil and give you some kind of paler rays essentially, but they don't show up that well, which is why I kind of do the reverse and show the ejector rays in pencil. So that is the technique for kind of getting those areas. Now we can see that this bit here is on the photograph is lighter than the Maria. So now we've got those areas marked out. We can go back in here in between those ejector rays and just get this bit looking darker, and that will make that area that we've just marked out look nice and pale compared to the background. It's all shades of grey, again just trying to get the differences in the shades of grey really being uniform across the whole picture. So there you've got like a kind of crater coming out, and it's the same technique for all of these other really small areas if you wanted to put them in. Over here, for example, around the edge of the highlands, there are these little areas that are much lighter, so you can go in with your rubber and just kind of rub those out. So you're sort of drawing with the rubber essentially. So you just lift off the pencil in that little area, and that will just give you that tonal difference. And then you can go around the boundary of that to just make sure that you've got that obvious difference there. And anywhere that you see little areas that are really significantly lighter, then you can go ahead and just rub that out. Same here with across I can never remember which sea is whichever one this is that Tranquility or Serenitatis? I can't remember, but you can see there are ejector rays coming through that are leaving white stripes through the sea. So you just get a clean edge of your rubber, pull through, and there are a couple of those in different directions. So you can just pull the rubber through and just take that off. So that is the process that I would use. Over on this right side, we've got a crater that's quite light in color and has a little bit of a central peak. I've left that light already. So we need to kind of fill in the rest of the background, because obviously this isn't all pure white, some of it is, but we need to mark where Tycho is, because the really white bit of the moon is the bit that stems out from Tycho. And Tycho looks great in a full moon because it's bright white and surrounded by this darker band. So you can kind of draw a kind of, that is fairly round actually, Tycho. So I'm just going over with my pencil in a circle, and then I'm just going to rub it with my finger. And that is Tycho. And then the bit around the outside here is all of these sort of white splatter pattern again. So there's this sort of region all around it that is really light in color. So you can mark that out and leave that completely free of any pencil, and then go in with a lighter pencil and just add some shading to the rest of the background. Not a lot, just some, so that those areas that are really white will stand out and the areas that are really dark will stand out, and it will give you that contrast between those different areas. So I like to just use a pencil on its side, leaving these bits. I'm going to go through with the rubber again and get some ejecta rays out of here, but you just want to make sure that this bit is a little bit darker than those really pale bits that we've just marked out. So side of the pencil, long strokes again. It's fine to have pencil strokes in the sketch. I keep saying that, but I think it's nice to see them. And then up here as well, just adding a little bit of texture and just showing that that is the really white bit, and these other bits are really white. All the bits in between are a sort of grey. Everything is shades of grey with the naked eye. On a photograph, obviously, you do have hints of colour from the different basalt composition. But all of this is about, within your sketch, having things that have got this sort of scale in the tone of your shades of grey. That is all that you're looking for. So if we hadn't coloured in all of the rest of this background here, the bit around Tycho wouldn't look very pale, and that's what we need it to look like. So rubber again, come out with some strokes, just ejecta rays coming out from there. And that makes a world of difference. The minute you've got a little bit of ejecta coming out in a paler colour, and then if you want to, again, you can go along each edge of that to just define those ejecta rays. I think it just gives them a little bit more definition when you draw in pencil. The rays themselves don't have a dark edge, but I just find that the picture looks just a little bit better for just giving that hint of something alongside them. Helps to just give you the contrast. And that's pretty much it for a full disk moon. So when you pull back out again, then it looks like the moon. One thing that you can do if you want to is to color the background in, and actually I like it both ways. Like this, it does look like the moon, but if you color in all of the background as well, it makes the bright bits look brighter, but it takes forever and you need a dark soft pencil to do it, and you end up with more of the pencil on you than you do on the actual sketch. But you can see on this one where I've actually gone in with a dark pencil and put all of those little kind of ejecta channels, and they're not grey on the original photograph, but it just adds a bit of definition doing that. And I actually did this with a way darker pencil, and I don't think it looks as natural, so I tend to keep it more muted now when I do a full disc. So I just want to show you in time-lapse form how to do this. If you have enjoyed doing this and you think you'd like to do it on black paper, this is how I do it. So any black paper will do. This is the first pad I ever bought off Amazon, and I really like it because the paper's really smooth, gives you a beautiful even blend. So I tend to just keep buying that now. The pastels I use are Stabilo Carbothello. They are not the cheapest, but I find they give me the best color payoff. You do not need a set of 24. You really don't, unless you're doing solar sketching in like prominences and what have you. But what you can do is buy them singly. So I buy the black, the white, and I accidentally bought some lamp black, which was a howling mistake on my part, but turned out to be a really handy mistake, and I'll explain why in a minute. So that's pretty much it. And in terms of how to do it, the principle is exactly the same, except that with pastels, your highlights can just be drawn on top because they show up on the black paper. So I normally put a thin layer of white and blend it, but then the rest of the process is identical to what we've just done. And each of these things around the outside that is casting a shadow, as I showed you earlier on, none of these are complex. There's a white squiggle with a black triangle. That's all these things are. And over here, they're just white squiggles with some shadows in various shapes, but the shapes are more or less running the same direction, not always, but that the sun is coming from the same angle, so the shadows are going to fall the same way. But you can see here these sunken bits of landscape, the differences in tone, so much easier to do in pastels. And all I've done there is blended a really fine bit of white pastel with a really tiny bit of grey pastel, or black, just blended out a lot. And that's all that is, but it gives you that entire illusion that that bit there is higher than that bit. And it is exactly the same principle as what I was doing before, looking at tonal differences, highlight, shade, highlight, shade. That's all that all of this is. And I just love the definition that you get between the light and the shade with pastels. That's why it's my go-to, because I just feel it's got that bit more impact. Trying to get a bright white shadow or a highlight on a pencil sketch is harder. You can actually do it with white paint. I've not tried that, but it very much looks like you've put white paint on some pencils, so I haven't done that myself. If you are, just some of my other sketches that I've done in pastels, and again, people will say, oh my God, it looks like a photograph. They're all just shapes. It's light, shade, squiggle, black squiggle, white squiggle. That's all any of these are. If you look at the individual bits of any of my sketches, none of them are particularly difficult to do. It's just that I take the time to sit and look where all the light and shade is and just squint at it and get that tonal difference and try to mimic that with my pencils. This is one of my favorite ones of a slightly bigger area of sinus iridum. Again, if you overlay this on a photograph, it is so wildly inaccurate, it just wouldn't go anywhere near to overlaying each other. And that's fine. It's not a scientific document, it's just a sketch. It's really fine if there are things that are a little bit different. This is one that I have wanted to do for years. This is based on the sunrise over Tycho Central Peak. It's a photograph taken by the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter, which has been out for years now, but it's still my favorite photograph ever from any space mission. And I have wanted to draw that in pastels for years. And a couple of months ago, I finally got round to doing it. It took me a week and I did it in layers. So again, it was like marking out the outlines, these just working in layers. I knew where the shadows were going to be. I marked those out. Just anywhere that's like sloping, just sweep down with the cotton bud to give you that kind of sloping slump terrace there. Anywhere that's got a harsh edge like this, just going along it with the white and the black. And I just worked in layers and used my pencil to mimic the texture. And again, can overlay it on the photograph, nothing like it, but the overall effect is beautiful and it just looks so great. If you want to do the whole disc moon on black paper with pastels, I have cut a circle out of a few pieces of paper to give me a template, just because it's really hard to control pastels when you're blending them, and having that shield there just gives you a little bit of help, really. But same as what we've just done in pencil, just looking at where the Maria lie, where all of the other features lie, the crater definition you're going to get a lot of near the Terminator, everywhere else just hints of. But again, all of this is just different shades of grey, using the pencil to make squiggles in appropriate directions and in the appropriate quantity to mimic the texture that I was seeing on the photograph. And they just look so beautiful. And then if you get any overspill of pastel around the edge, said, you can clean it up with a putty rubber. So I'm glad I found my putty rubber again, because it's meant I can do that. These whole moon things they're pieces of art that I've done for so many people as gifts. So one of my oldest friends turned 50 earlier this week. I've done a moon sketch for her as the moon looked on her birthday, put it in a frame. It is a beautiful personal gift. They get an original piece of artwork that you've created for them. It works for weddings. I've got another friend getting married at the weekend. Today I did their sketch, almost a full moon when they get married. No two are the same ever. And when I lie them side by side, none of my pastel sketches look the same either. But these are such a beautiful gift. And I've given these to so many people now. I'm kind of running out of people to give them to. But there's such a lovely thing that you can do for that person that has everything that may like the moon. So this is my version of the moon phase diagram. Again, look how different the style is on some of these. They don't look that similar to each other. So it doesn't matter if the sketch doesn't look like someone else's, my own don't. If you're doing one of these full disc sketches and you find out the moon on that special day is a 1% waxing crescent, then there's not a lot of moon to work with. So this is where my mistakenly buying the lamp black came in handy, because the lamp black has a pale blue undertone. If you look at the moon through binoculars when there's a crescent moon and you have earthshine, it has a slight bluish tint to it. So what I do is basically draw the earthshine the way that I would draw a full moon, but very, very muted. I don't give it like lots of really strong highlight. Layer of the lamp black down first, then all the white that goes on top of it takes on a slight bluish tone. The rest of it is just exactly the same as doing a full moon sketch, except pared down, really. Then at the end draw the white bit on, or you can actually do it where you've got like a mega HDR composition where you've got surface details on a thicker crescent, then very muted earthshine on the rest of it, and that makes the moon look a bit more interesting than just drawing a crescent moon. So all of these techniques are things that I've just self-taught, and they work really, really well. So yeah, I hope you found that helpful. And I'll just switch. Can you see how messy my desk is? Not where I'm drawing. Just working on many projects at once on this desk, and there's stuff everywhere. But I hope you enjoyed that, and I hope it kind of made you realize sketching isn't as difficult as you may have thought it was. I'd love it if you all sent me your picture of your sketches and I can put them in a collage. You don't have to put your name on it if you don't want me to know who it is, but I'd love to get a copy of them all. So I'll see in the chat if any questions have come in, but if there's anyone in the room with questions, I don't have to drive home, so I'm here as long as you want me.
Any questions from the room first? So John Axtell has asked, how do you deal with dew dampening the paper when you sketch at the eyepiece?
With what, sorry?
When
dew?
You sketch, when you
dew on the thing.
Dew on the paper when you're sketching from the eyepiece.
Believe it or not, you can buy a heated clipboard. It's a thing. But what you could do instead is maybe warm something up, like maybe have a hot water bottle sitting on your sketching pad before you go out, and it'll just keep that temperature up, and just so the temperature doesn't have to be warm, it just has to be warmer than the dew point. So because yeah, if you're going to sit with an object for a really long time, there is a good possibility that dew will form. So yeah, if you're going to do this seriously, a heated clipboard is definitely a thing. But otherwise, just use a hand warmer and just place it over your pad before you start, and that should just keep the temperature up enough. In terms of sketching at the eyepiece, especially looking at the moon, but also with deep sky objects, when you've got a clipboard, you need to be able to see what you're drawing. So the way that I illuminate the clipboard is to use an LED reading light, but then I've eaten an entire box's worth of Quality Street strawberry creams and used the wrappers and wrapped it around to make it a more muted red light, because you don't want a lot of light. So every time you look at your sketch pad, you are trashing your night vision to a degree. So I keep one eye closed and I view through the eyepiece with left eye, close it, draw with the right eye, so that my eyes are kept separate, so that I maintain my night vision in my seeing eye and use my drawing eye to draw with. Might not work for everybody. If your eyesight's bobbins like mine's getting, then it can be tricky, but that's a good way of preserving your night vision. I mean, there's no night vision if you're sketching the moon, obviously, because it's so bright, but that will actually stop you seeing your pad, actually, if the moon's really bright. So yeah, that there are things to overcome. And I think ergonomics is very, very important if you're going to be sat drawing at the eyepiece. Nebulae, not so bad, because visually there's not a great deal to nebulae. It's a field of stars and then some smudges, so that isn't too much of a problem. But with planetary, lunar, solar, just sitting and spending some time with that, it's important to get all the detail. And if your back is aching within 2 minutes, you're not going to sit and do that. So I think with binoculars, a parallelogram mount is really helpful, because you don't have a tripod to lean over and all of that jazz. So try to get yourself as comfortable as humanly possible, and warm as well, because if you sat still for 40 minutes in December, you're going to get cold. So just, yeah, something like this, just keep yourself comfortable and warm, and just take your time at the eyepiece. Still quicker than imaging.
Indeed. A lovely comment from Rachel, which I think we could all.
Yeah.
This was so much fun. Thank you. It was lovely.
I hope you will try it with other pictures. I mean, the internet is full of amazing photographs. If you don't have a telescope, just go to the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter page and find some there. If you know someone that's an imager, I always ask their permission, just out of courtesy. No one will ever know that you've used their picture if you don't put it online when you've drawn it. But, you know, I've never yet had anyone say, no, I don't want you to draw my photograph. Everybody's really amenable to it. So it's good fun. Practice from photographs and then use those skills at the eyepiece once you get more comfortable with the pencil. Any
other questions? Mary, thank you very much indeed. That was absolutely stunning.
I'm glad. I hope you all enjoyed it.
I hope that all those people who feel up to it will send to you. I think if it passed by very quickly, I will. Shall we send them to you at your email address?
Yes.
Right. I will.
I'll stick it in the chat, but for people that are on Zoom. Make sure I've typed it right. No, I haven't. Honestly, I need to get my eyes tested. I can't see.
Well, I'll put it up.
There we go. That is the right email address.
spicyspiny@gmail.com.
Yeah.
And John Lewin, thank you, Mary. Your enthusiasm is really fun and infectious.
Oh, thank you.
Amen to that, and very enjoyable. And Daffyd has said, awesome.
Great. It's one of those things that I find to be such a mindful activity, and in a chaotic world we all need a bit of that, and it's just a calm space to just sit and think about nothing but what you're drawing. Last year I took on a challenge to do an astronomy sketch a day for 2 months, and by week 2 I was like, why did you say 2 months? Why didn't you just do 1? But by the end of it I was sad to have finished, because I was finding that the only time I had to do it was just before bed. I was sleeping better, I was calm when I went to bed, because everything goes out of your mind and you're just drawing. And it's just, even if some of the sketches didn't turn out great, it doesn't matter. It was a beautiful activity to be doing and I loved it, and I need to do it again. Actually, I need to, after Halloween. I've got too much to do before Halloween, but after Halloween I need to make an effort to do more, just for the sake of it.
Good, thank you very much indeed.
Right, I look forward to getting everyone's email.
Oh. There we are. Before we break, November we've got Tritine Katrine Rayner, who you remember wrote an article for one of our issues of Gaslight. She's going to be talking, since she lives in Wales, probably remotely, exploring astronomy and space through philately. And then in December, a colleague from MSSL is going to be talking to us about what Gaia has taught us about the Milky Way, bearing in mind that Gaia DR3 came out in the summer, and that's got spectroscopy information with it. After the break, Rob is going to give us what's up. And if we have a 15-minute break, just feel free to, for a nature break and so forth. And I should say, I'll pre-warn you that next month, we had a committee meeting last Thursday, and we decided that whilst there's not much at the moment we can do for a reliable source of drinks and so forth, so please continue to bring your own or your hip flask, whatever takes your fancy. But next month and thereafter, we hope to provide free biscuits. What more can you want for your £20 a year? Sorry, anyway,